Morning, everyone. I'm Bob Meyers of the National Press Foundation. This is another in our series of How I Got the Story. Our guest today is Mike Walter, a veteran television producer and newscaster. Mike was on his way to work at USA Today on September 11th, 2001. He was stuck in traffic. Suddenly, a hijacked jet came screaming in overhead and flew directly into the wall of the Pentagon. Everyone on board the plane died, as did dozens of people inside the building itself. And the sound of that crash could be heard for miles. It was also a sound heard in Mike's soul. It changed him. The impact of being an eyewitness to domestic terrorism produced in him sleeplessness, depression, and denial, and ultimately led him to journalistically explore that larger issue of trauma, which could involve something for journalists as mundane as covering a fire or a shooting, a murder, or a car crash. One result of his exploration was a prize-winning film he directed and produced called Breaking News, Breaking Down, in which he deals very candidly with his own emotional struggles after 9/11, as well as the difficulties journalists in New Orleans faced after Hurricane Katrina. Mike has put this perspective on it. Journalists, like police and firemen, are the first responders, arriving at the scene of a conflict armed only with a press pass and a notebook. He calls for greater newsroom sensitivity to what reporters go through as they do their jobs, even in this time of economic turmoil. And he has made himself available as a resource for reporters and editors who don't want to talk to their bosses about what they're experiencing. Because he tells us, despite what we may think, we are not immune, and we can be deeply affected. Let's take a look at a clip, and then we'll talk with Mike Walter.
I've covered every kind of accident you can imagine.
And you can see the plane perched above me here.
More fires than I'd care to count. More murders than I'd care to remember.
I think they're coming in with a body now.
But none of it prepared me for the biggest breaking news story of my career.
No, I saw this plane, a jet, American Airlines jet coming, and I thought, this doesn't add up. It's really low. And I saw it. It just went, I mean, it was like a cruise missile with wings. Went right there and slammed right into the Pentagon.
I found on September 11th, as the day wore on, what I saw began to wear on me.
You've been a television and reporter and filmmaker for many years. Why did you decide to put your experiences into a film?
Initially, what I was going to do was do this film about John McCusker, who had a breakdown after Katrina.
And he is?
He's a photojournalist with the Times-Picayune in New Orleans. And what ended up happening was a lot of people rallied around him and created this program, Target New Orleans, basically, where we went down and worked alongside journalists down there. And it was a lot of journalists who had gone through trauma, kind of talking to journalists down there, look, you're going to get to the other side. This is tough and everything, but we can tell you, you know, there's some growth that comes out of this. So I was just going to do a film about John and what had happened to him and all these journalists rallying to his side. And then I thought, you know, that'd be really pretty disingenuous if I don't talk about my own experience and how I grappled with what I grappled with. And so the film actually starts with me talking about my experience and then segues into David Handschuh, who's a photojournalist in New York, who was shooting as the towers came down, basically on top of him. He was physically and emotionally damaged.
There's somewhere there is tape of David on the ground in a candy store or a small little store near the near Ground Zero, covered in the ash and the dust from the buildings. I've seen that.
Yeah, I think even the museum has had it on display. So I told David's story, and then we got into John's story, and then really the film is, I think it's a positive film because it really shows the growth that can come out of this sort of thing, and really when you think about it, dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder is dealing with another form of adversity, and that's what life's about, and really it kind of helps to shape who we are, and we do grow out of these. You get wisdom, I think, out of it, and you learn more about yourself and what's inside you.
I want to ask you where you have taken the film, awards it's won, and I guess maybe I'd like you to start with, how did you finance it?
I was very fortunate. The Dart Society, which is an outgrowth of the Dart Center, which is based at Columbia University, gave me a grant to get started on it. And so then I also did a fundraiser here in the D.C. area, which also raised some funds to pay for it. And
let me just clarify, the Dart Center specializes in dealing in trauma issues involving journalists.
Exactly.
Okay.
And if you're watching and you're a journalist and this is of interest to you, they have a Dart Ochberg Fellowship every year, which I would heartily recommend that you apply for. So I got that grant money, and with the fundraising, we were able to put it together, and then we debuted it here in Washington, D.C., and it got a front page piece in the Washington Times, and there's been a lot of real good news coverage about it. And the film itself has done very well. It's won 8 awards. It just most recently won at the Cannes Independent Film Festival over in Cannes, France, for Best Documentary Short. It won an award at Sundance. So we've garnered a lot of awards, garnered a lot of attention and news coverage. But one of the most gratifying things for me is when I screen it, and there's always, invariably, there's journalists in the audience. And each one gets up and shares their own stories. And I think it's really given journalists permission, really, to talk about this, which a lot of us don't. And it's interesting, I think, when you look at soldiers, you look at paramedics, you look at police officers, firefighters, they've gotten there a lot quicker than journalists have in terms of being able to accept this and talk about it. I think, for whatever reason, we still got this machismo. We don't want to chat about this.
I always regarded the notebook as my barrier to any difficult or negative feelings. If I could take my notes, I would be just fine and nothing could impact me. So you have become very inadvertently the liaison, the connection between journalism and the world of trauma. And if you look at journalism in a certain way, we encounter it, in fact, seek it out a lot. Plane goes down, we are there. The shootings, the disruptions of normal life, the difficulties in dysfunctional relationships, we are there. Based on your experience, do you think newsroom conduct should change, or newsroom administrators should routinely make counseling or consultation services available to reporters?
Absolutely, I do. I think that I just did a session with a group of journalists from Voice of America where I screened the film and just basically gave a talk. And
this was in Atlanta?
Yeah, no, here in
Mm-hmm.
D.C. And it was interesting how many of the journalists there were saying, again, it was therapeutic for them, but many of them were like, why aren't our bosses here? Those are the ones who really need to see this and really need to be thinking about this issue. That's not to say that there aren't bosses out there that do get it. I mean, I mentioned the piece in the Washington Times. John Solomon, who was the executive editor of the Times, saw my piece. We got to do a story on this. Tom Curley, the head of the AP, when he first saw it, sent me an email with a great deal of praise, but he said before I did that, I stopped myself and said, I got to call my reporters in Gaza and see how they're doing. I got to call my reporters in New Orleans who are covering Katrina, see how they're doing. And I think that's really important, that managers start to understand that, and especially, looking at the situation that we're in right now, where there's so much fragmentation, managers seem to have their eye on the ball, which is how do we grow audience? How do we continue to grow circulation? All these kinds of issues. I don't think they're thinking a lot about, geez, is Bill having a tough time? Is Mary over here, who just covered this, triple murder, how's she doing? And I think that that's an important element of their job too. And I do think that, I do hope that this helps in an evolution in newsrooms across the country, and not just here in the United States. It is happening overseas. I had an opportunity to go to Australia last year, and I got to tell you, there are a lot of newsroom managers over there who get it. In fact, the ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, they have a peer support network that's put together. And I'm one of the peer support people here in the United States. They've got journalists here. If you're uncomfortable calling your boss to say, hey, I'm having a tough time of it, you can call me. We can talk confidentially. And that's something that they offer, which I think is a great offer.
So what's your number or website?
My website is, I've got a couple of them. I've got one which is waltermedia.tv. The one with the film is breakingnewsbreakingdown.com. And either one of those, you go to that, you can contact me.
Cool. Okay. What's next for you?
I'm working on a couple of films right now. One's about healthcare through the eyes of patients with rare diseases and kind of how they tried to influence legislation here on Capitol Hill, didn't have much success, and now how they view the healthcare bill and where we still need to go as a nation in terms of healthcare. I'm also doing one on green energy. So I'm working on those projects.
Excellent, excellent. Keep us informed of your progress, and thanks for coming by.
I can't thank you enough.
My pleasure.